それでは最後の招待講演者でありますカリフォルニア大学アーバイン校教授のラリー・クーパーマン先生です。先生には大学と社会をつなぐユニバーサルアクセスとしてのオープン教育についてお話をいただきます。クーパーマン先生、お願いいたします。
You know, I'm the only non-Japanese speaking person on the panel. And I'm beginning to feel like my grandparents who spoke 3 languages but couldn't read or write. So with that, I hope that I'm going to learn a little bit of Japanese while I'm here. This is my 5th visit to Japan, so I shouldn't say that I'm going to learn too much because I haven't yet. But on the other hand, I think that Japan is very important to open education. And I think that, you know, higher education is a little bit of soft diplomacy that every country practices. We just had at Irvine 2 weeks ago a delegation from the Middle East arranged by our State Department to begin to use open educational resources in Arabic. And what you can see is that there's some interest, and I'm not sure what it is, but the State Department understands that it has some interest. We've seen universities in Brazil that open campuses in Africa, in the Portuguese-speaking former colonies, and that they use open educational resources to reach as much of the population as they can and make a contribution there, but also understanding that it's something that Brazil does. And it's a way of integrating themselves with the world, and of course, behind that, there's also economics at play. So my talk is about universal access to higher education and what the implications are for society and the university. And I'm going to begin with the framework that I use. And a professor at UC Berkeley in the 70s, Martin Trow, came up with this conception that there's a movement from elite universities to a phase of mass universities that ultimately gives way to universal access to higher education. He even put percentages on it, but he viewed these things as kind of idealizations of what's happening in the world. But if you actually look at the target that governments set for the percentage of their population that they want to have attended a college, you'll see that they always target an increased number, whether it's Europe, the United States, Africa, Latin America, or Asia. And so there's this process that corresponds to economic development as well, by which governments target universal access. Even if we don't do anything, even if we don't have MOOCs, even if we don't have open courseware, the percentage of people on the planet who will have attended colleges and universities will rise over time. The UNESCO and OECD are projecting that actually the rate will slow down a little bit from the past 10 years. But nonetheless, they even see countries like Nigeria powering through and raising significantly in the next 20 years the number of college graduates. And this makes a lot of sense, because from a family perspective, what does it mean to go to college? And I was giving a talk with for the rectors of the University of Guadalajara, a system of 15 universities, and the rectors, I asked them, I said, how many of you are the first to ever attend university? And about half of them in that room were the first. And we have this phenomenon across the globe of the first one in a given family to attend the university, but followed by many more. So I mentioned that my grandparents were illiterate in 3 languages, but my father got a PhD from NYU. So in one generation, there was a great leap forward, to use an expression. And since then, once that leap is made, following generations have that built into their DNA. So we're seeing this world as it's changing from elite universities that were concerned with replicating a governing class, to mass institutions, particularly in the post-war period in Europe and Japan and the US, and now to universal. And Martin Trow was using California as his example when he first looked at this. So California had a master plan where anyone could drive 10, 15 miles down the road and attend a college or a university. And the tuition was nothing. So if we're looking at the antecedents of MOOCs, we can see these in these kinds of master plans of universal educational systems. The second thing that's happening, though, is that as the systems get more massive, we can't build our way out of the increase in student populations. So that's the first thing, is that in some ways we have to move towards digital learning because there's no other way to actually spend our ways by creating all of the buildings, all of the laboratories that may be necessary. A second aspect of this is as systems get more massive, the average qualification of the academics that are doing the teaching drops, because we can actually admit more students more quickly than we can graduate people with masters and PhDs to do the teaching. And again, if we look at those kinds of numbers of this massification, we see that in 1998, that's the blue line, about 17% worldwide were enrolling in higher education. By 2011, this was reaching, that line is actually a little bit low. It's close to 30%. Not quite doubling, but getting close to it over a short period of time. And so you can see this tendency at play to move towards universal higher education. There's a problem with that also on this part of the students. The problem is that for every extra 1% that you admit into your university system, they are less well prepared than the previous group that got admitted. Because if not for the fact that they come from less privileged backgrounds that didn't have access before, they would have already been there. So that increase by 1% is to less privileged students, by and large, throughout the world. So I'm going to talk about Africa as one example where the enrollments are the lowest overall in the world. But you can see what's come to play in terms of the use of distance learning throughout the world, is that here the African Virtual University, with funds from the African Development Bank, created a program for secondary math and science teacher preparation. And you'll see in here, you'll see the satellite dish. That's where the internet's coming from. You'll see the backup generator in case the power fails. And you'll see a classroom behind it that fits 20 computers and a server. And the server is synchronized every night with Nairobi. And so what it leads to is this, is that then you have a faculty training at the given university, and following that, students are actually enrolled in these programs, and the degree that's developed centrally is distributed throughout, in the first case, 12 universities in 10 countries, and now 27 universities in the phase 2 of their project, which is in computer science. But again, if we look at this example, 2 of the first 12 universities were in Somalia, a conflict zone. And they built buildings like we saw in the first slide, and they built the backup generators and the internet access, and Somali students were being graduated as secondary math and science teachers. So the reality is we live in a world where distance learning can be provided anywhere. There's a cost behind this, but it can be provided anywhere. The technical barriers have fallen. And distance education also corresponds to these 3 trends that UNESCO identified in the 2009 report on higher education. The first one was that universities are interested in revenue enhancement, whether it's the result of budget cuts, on the part of public universities. They're also interested in globalization or internationalization. And the third aspect that they raised was massification, which we've just seen some of the statistics behind it. But if you look at distance education, it was a cost reducer. So we aren't investing as much in physical facilities. We can also scale better than we could before. We can also, of course, reach new markets. So there's the limitations, the geographic limitations are gone. But finally, in terms of massification, we talked about the average qualification of the academic dropping. We can at least try to create a baseline instructional quality that supports this. An example of that would be in Indonesia, where they use open courseware combined with exams to supply much of the computer science that's taught. So a student is allowed in Indonesia to get 1/3 of their credits in a computer science degree from open courseware plus an exam. And the reason they do that is they have some very good professors, but they don't have enough. And when you don't have enough professors, you have to make do. They also have, I don't know how many thousands of islands. So literally the physical restraints on them are incredible, and the ability to then provide at a distance baseline instruction and allow them to get some of their coursework out by open courseware has provided both the instructional quality, because it's produced by some of the top professors, as well as reducing the costs and allowing access to computer science for thousands who would not otherwise be able to get a full degree in computer science. So we look at the impact on the university, and I apologize for this slide. He looks a little tired. The first thing is, with open courseware, we began this notion of free content. So there's 26,000 modules visible, and tens of thousands more if their RSS feeds were fixed. But 26,000 modules visible in a variety of languages from the Open Courseware Consortium website, which directly just links to the members' websites. So there's literally too much content. So the problem in this screen, in whatever language, is that students, especially if we're talking about learning, we need to curate a path for them. So when you're in a university and you're in a department, you actually discuss what should the undergraduate curriculum look like, and you modify it along as time goes on, as needed. But with Open Courseware, we treated it, and this is a self-criticism, if you will, we treat it as a place to just put your stuff. It does make it visible, it is available, but what we really need to do is to curate those 26,000 modules into very good learning paths. And so we're looking at working out agreements with institutions in the US like Smithsonian Enterprises, which is a non-traditional entrant into higher education, a museum system, to be able to provide these courses, the nuggets that are in there, in the right form to the right people. Or we're in conversations with IEEE, which is the largest professional association in the world, with 400,000 members across the globe. So we think that we need these reputable third parties to actually say, this is what a good sequence would look like. But the sequence needs to consist of not just one university or one set of courses, but rather of this collaborative activity of universities globally. The other thing is we're beginning, and the other speakers have talked about this, but we're beginning to get better data about the people who are taking these courses, and also beginning to look at metrics of success. So one of the things you can do is you can look at the metrics of people who are taking your MOOCs, and you can say, 3 minutes, oh my goodness. And you can begin to say what is going to be necessary for them to succeed. In this case, they're looking at teamwork, problem solving, and engagement. And it turns out if a student goes online 3 nights in a row, that it's nearly as good as the grade they got at the end of the course for predicting their success. There's automation. The Hewlett Foundation had a prize for being able to mass score through machine learning essays. This is technologies that are used by, for example, the TOEFL exam. It's actually somewhat mainstream at this point. There's open source packages. There are packages that are available that will work with any language. But the idea is that once you set up a rubric, that instead of having to work out, having to score 10,000 by whatever means, you can get an automated score that's as good as a human being if the rubric's set up. We need to work on peer learning, and there's different models. There's models of small peer groups in which members can only join if they have already submitted an assignment, and which a course can only be approved if the community has accepted it. That's the peer-to-peer university model. There's a question and answer model that Open Study uses, and there's, of course, and I won't go into this, but there's the peer learning that goes on in MOOCs. I think it's an area that we have to improve upon. We're not there yet with peer learning. The social environment that is essential in face-to-face education is not replicated well, and we have to continue to do research and figure out what's needed to make that more effective. So then there's, of course, scale, and they've talked about it with the MOOCs, but you know, at this point, the Open Courseware Consortium had 360 million visits to member sites in 2013. So all of a sudden, you can get a whole lot of data about what people are doing. I would like to turn back to this central problem. What do we do to actually improve the lives of people who don't have access to higher education, and who it's very easy to say, well, educate everybody, but the task of how you do it and defining what that means to educate everybody is often left unsaid. I don't have time left today, but that's a clear conversation. We can create learning pathways. University of California, Irvine has 4 years plus some graduate courses in chemistry as video lectures, and we're taking steps to move that forward. But the idea is, let's design pathways for students based on who they are. When I speak to community college audiences, they say, you know, I say, who knows your students best? And the ultimate answer is that they do. The professors in the room at the community colleges know their students, and they have to design learning pathways for those students that they know better than anybody else. And what's the impact on society of all this? Here's a traditional chart where the value, the net present value of your investment in education is shown for the US. Less than high school, the lowest, bachelor's degree, the highest, and of course it could go on to master's and so forth. But here's the other ugly truth, that 41%, in the United States, 41% of minimum wage workers have at least some college education. So again, the notion of universal access to education it has to address the issue of what kinds of opportunities exist in the society. There has to be a correspondence between economy and the educational system. And so what we don't want to do is educate people for a future of working at car rental shops. Or if we do, we want to educate all of the car rental workers because education is a public good. But we have to be very careful about what we say about that. And here's, I got to go back. And so in Tunisia, for example, if you look at the purple line, that line over there that goes up, the percentage of unemployment for university-educated Tunisians went in 1994 from less than 4% to almost 20% in 2007. It's because the government used to absorb the graduates of higher education into their ministries, into their bureaucracies of government. But there was, at a certain point, that collapsed as there was no economic system that was supporting that graduation rate. And so all of a sudden, you got the highest unemployment rates among college graduates and the lowest unemployment rates among people with no education. Of course, yes, it'd be true per capita, that the college graduates were earning more, but far fewer of them were employed. So we have to be very careful about this argument about universal education, but we have to do it. We have to use open educational resources to share knowledge and to transform the world, to address social problems that exist. And it's only through that creation of a highly educated global population that will solve issues of public health, sustainability, climate change, and so forth. We have to begin to transfer knowledge from the universities to the communities that are most impacted by those social problems. And that is another form of universal access to higher education. Thank you very much.